And we'll get started. As always, we're recording today, so if you have to check out to answer an email or something, don't worry, we'll get this posted as quickly as possible after the meeting so you have access to the information here. Just a quick overview of our agenda today. We're going to do some accountability updates to start off. There's a lot going on right now as we head towards a new year with accountability and restarting of the dashboard. And then we'll dive into our assessment updates with our assessment team, and we'll be joined at some point by Marcus Betancourt, our Region 11 success agent, and we'll have plenty of questions undoubtedly around that he'll be able to help us out, join our team to help out. Just a quick reminder who's on the DAAN team. I'm Evan Bartelheim. I'm the project director for accountability and data literacy. I'm joined by my colleague Hillary Weissman, who's also in the accountability and data literacy unit, Stephen Bartlett from our assessment unit, as well as Stephanie Fortunato. And then our behind the scenes people, Jaime Oliveros and Margarita Sandoval. And I'm going to say with great sadness today that Jaime Oliveros, he's behind the scenes. You may not know him as well if you're not in our CalPads network, but he's an integral part of our team, and he is leaving. His last day is tomorrow. He's fortunately for us not going far. We'll still see him. He's joining Montebello Unified in a role as a CalPads coordinator. So it's a great opportunity for him, and we certainly will miss him here, but we'll keep him in the fold. So thanks, Jaime, for 3 years of amazing work, and you've done so much for us. We're definitely gonna leave a big hole. So just a quick overview in the Canvas page today that Hillary dropped the information in, the link to that. We have our agenda, we have our slides for today, and we have a number of resources around accountability and assessment that you should take a look at. Just some additional pieces that we may reference throughout the slides, but those are under modules, and we may add additional things after the fact. So the Canvas page is always there as a living, breathing resource for you. Just a little bit of housekeeping for today. Just a reminder, the purpose is just to provide you with the timeliest of updates related to data, accountability, and assessment. And as of right now, everything is current. Things, of course, are still subject to change, but it's current as of yesterday. And for the purposes of this meeting, because of the size of the meeting, we really prefer that you provide any questions, drop them in the chat. We will have some planned stops to review and answer those questions. Please remain muted though throughout, just to keep the flow. We have a lot of information to get through in a short amount of time. If we have unanswered questions or just questions we want to give a more thorough follow-up to, we will answer those in our follow-up email, which we will send out within a week, as well as offer the recording. So that's our process. You're always welcome to email us, dan@lacoe.edu, with any questions that spring into your mind after the meeting is over. So we're going to jump right into accountability, because who doesn't love accountability? And we're going to really basically be talking about the state board updates, a number of things from the March meeting. That included a submission of a waiver related to the DAS schools, the Dashboard Alternative School Status schools, and some modified methods for calculating academic achievement graduation rate. Hillary's going to dive into that and what the implications are for that. And then I'm going to talk about the 2022 accountability, the dashboard update, the work plan that was put forth and approved by the board, as well as the submission of California's 21-22, an addendum template, which the Department of Education offered to states to submit, and the implications that has with regards to the dashboard for identification purposes for CSI and ATSI. But I'm going to hand it over right now to Hillary, and she's going to give you a quick update on the Dashboard Alternative School Status waiver. Take it away, Hillary.
Thank you very much, Evan. If you can go back and actually stay on that outstanding opening Dashboard Alternative School Status slide, that'd be great. Good morning and happy Tuesday, everyone. Today, I wanted to briefly review the Dashboard Alternative School Status, or DAAS, General Waiver. And just to review the origins and timeline of the DAAS program, which goes back to 2017 in the California Educational Code section 25052D, which allowed the establishment of the DAAS program. This program was intended to ensure that the California's accountability system fairly evaluates the success or progress of alternative schools that serve high-risk students. With the adoption of the dashboard in 2017, the SBE acknowledged that the system did not address the success or progress of students in alternative school settings fairly. The SBE subsequently directed the CDE to develop indicators for alternative schools that evaluate the success and progress of these schools based on the LCFF state priorities and accountability requirements in ESSA. And as a quick refresher, schools are automatically assigned to DAS status because the school type is identified in education code. So this would be schools like continuation schools, county community schools, juvenile court schools, etc., or as a district operated special education school that has at least 70% of students who participate in the California Alternate Assessment, or the CAASPP, in grades 3 through 8 and 11. The California Alternative Assessment is given to a very select number of students, but they are highly concentrated in district operated special education schools. And additionally, there is an opportunity provided for schools to apply for DAS status. And in this situation, it must be validated that at least 70% of the school population is comprised of high-risk students. Now to that beautiful timeline, please. I know it's hard to probably remember 2020, much less 2017, but if you take a look further into the background of the DAS program, in 2017 is when the state board requested the development of the DAS program, which consisted of a robust work conducted in partnership with the alternative schools community. Included in this work group was a state board, CPAG, and alternative schools task force, and other interest groups to develop and vet the proposals. In 2018, the CDE was able to bring before the state board to approve the use of modified methods of state indicators for DAS schools. In 2020, California received a letter from ED stating that the use of modified methods to calculate state indicators for DAS schools is not permissible. Specifically, the following is prohibited: establishing different cut scores for the academic indicator and using a one-year graduation rate. Additionally, in December, to be exact, the CPAG received an updated letter from the ED in which the CDE received feedback on the modified measures for DAS schools. And in January 2021, the SBE approved amendments to California's ESSA state plan to bring the DAS modified methods business rules for calculating the academic achievement indicator into compliance with federal law. As of January 2022, the ED sent 2 letters in response to California's ESSA state plan amendments. In February, the SBE received a memo with a copy of the responses from the ED. Moving along to the intent of the DAS program, as you can see, the intent was not to develop a separate accountability system for alternative schools, but rather to include modified metrics for indicators on the California School Dashboard indicators that fairly evaluate alternative schools. Specifically, DAS schools receive performance colors on every state indicator. However, to fairly hold DAS schools accountable, 3 indicators have been identified for modified methods. Specifically, the graduation rate indicator, the college career indicator, and the academic indicator. So as we move along here, so a letter from the ED was specifically stated, it specifically stated that the CDE's modified methods did not meet the ESSA requirements. It was stated that ESSA only allowed the use of alternative accountability metrics for schools missing the data required for accountability determinations, specifically preschool through 2nd grade schools, since these schools are unable to have an academic indicator because they do not test in these grade levels, and therefore an alternative accountability metric is permitted. However, they do not approve this for schools that do have the necessary data to receive an accountability determination. So this would be DAS schools that test students, therefore unable to substitute an accountability matrix. As we move along, we look at this slide to see what the denial and impact of these amendments have. You'd no longer be able to use the 1-year graduation rate. Instead, you'd have to use the 4-year cohort rate. Additionally, DAS schools would be held to the same cut scores for the academic indicator on the 5x5 performance level grid as non-DAS schools. And so this would begin immediately with the 2022 dashboard that's due to be released this fall. So there's an option to request a waiver of ESSA statute, which is being discussed. It has been done in the past and would potentially keep the current system in place. I'm going to allow for modified measures for DOS schools through the DOS 1-year graduation rate under the graduation rate indicator. Different 5x5 cut scores for DOS schools and for the academic indicator, different 5x5 cut scores for DOS schools as well. Now, if that wasn't quick enough, let me walk you through the last slide here before I turn it back over to Evan. Well, let's walk through the additional considerations the ED provided in the response letter to the CDE on the DOS amendments. Specifically, 2 ways suggested to reduce the impact of identification of DOS schools being over-identified for support or partial attendance modifications to the dashboard indicators, and also to modify how schools are assisted with support. For partial assistance, looking at excluding students who have not attended the same school within an LEA for at least half a school year. For school support, eligibility potentially changing the identification pool to the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools from all schools to identification type. So this would be elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and DOS schools. Additionally, while the CDE is waiting for action from the ED on the waiver, CDE is exploring options to continue to include the modified measures for the graduation rate on the dashboard for informational purposes. This may include other yet to be determined measures. A new report potentially that displays additional DOS color placement designation on the school dashboard and additional 5x5 placement reports. And finally, the CDE is also considering the development of a new report that displays DOS schools distance from standard without the participation rate penalty. I went as quick as I possibly could for you, sir. Back to you.
Thank you, Hillary. Yeah, so we kicked off with the DOS information, and hopefully they'll get the waiver that the CDE is applying for, because as you'll hear in the next series of slides, I think with the reinstatement of accountability, there will definitely be considerations or concerns for all schools, and a lot of concerns have already been expressed related to accountability measures for this year in the dashboard. But we'll go through what those are, and you'll see the implications for all schools. But of course, DOS schools are impacted a lot more than comprehensive schools are. So, and we do want to talk about the work plan for accountability that the CDE put forward and the state board approved. So we are obligated under both state law and federal ESEA law to return to holding schools and districts accountable, both for student achievement and other measures as reported on the dashboard. And the U.S. Department of Ed requires California, since we take federal funds, to begin implementing identifying schools for comprehensive support and improvement, as well as the additional targeted support improvement, ATSI, using the 2022 dashboard. And we'll get into what the implications for that are.
She's on a Zoom with the audit.
Audits in town. So we will be talking about what the dashboard implications will be. So Assembly Bill 130, if you recall, that was passed a year ago in the summer, was required that the dashboard be re-implemented. However, you couldn't use any of the prior year's data. So this year only status will be displayed, and we'll talk about what that means. And there is an exception this year, which is the college and career indicator, which can't be reported because the 2021 graduating cohort, when they were in grade 11, we did not have any summative assessments administered. So out of fairness to everyone, there was no way really to generate this for the fall. So the CCI will not be included. In lieu of that, they'll do again what they did this year, which is to generate the college and career measures as just an additional report for LEAs. But they won't have a CCI on the dashboard. So there won't be an ability to report any change. So that's the difference from the prior year's data because of these AB 130 restrictions, and that'll have some implications, which we'll talk about shortly. What does that mean? So just as an example of what status only means, you may recall if you can cast your mind back as far as 2019 with the English Learner Progress Indicator, the ELPI, which requires 3 years worth of LPAC data that we couldn't generate. We didn't have sufficient years worth of LPAC data to generate an LP. So in lieu of that, they had 2 years. They were able to generate what they call the baseball card, which was just this reporting out on the status level using the cut scores from the 5x5 for status. So the status levels is similar to that. Then they made some proxy determinations for what would be a red on the dashboard or blue. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit, but this is what they're reporting or plan to report on the dashboard. There may be some modifications, and the dashboard technical advisory is looking at ways to report this, but I expect it'll be something similar to this, if not exactly like this. So what will be reported, so the data that'll be used for the indicators that are available will be, the Smarter Balance summative assessments for ELA and math, not science. We'll get to that later, but only ELA and math will be included. Also, chronic absentee and suspension rate. Now, interestingly, they identified the data being used as the 21-22 enrollment data. They do look at suspensions and they do look at absenteeism. They've actually been reporting that on DataQuest. So I'm not quite sure what the intent of identifying that data here was, but I expect that they will just be reporting absenteeism and suspension rate as they have been, but this time it'll be on the dashboard. Your English learner progress will use those 2 years. Fortunately, we do have 2 years of LPAC data now, including the 2021 and then this year's administration results. And then finally, the graduation rate will look at the class of 2022, but using that modified version. So they'll also look at the students in the class of 2021 who ended up graduating in 21-22, those 5th year graduates. So that's the combined 4th and 5th year. And then they'll look at the DAS students who graduate in 21-22 also. I do want to talk about participation rate as it does affect the dashboard academic indicator. Last week, an email went out and we've got it included in the Canvas links, but this should be pay serious attention and do some investigation of your own to better understand it. I will be, completely transparent here. Before I was in this role, I remember attending all the DAAN meetings and hearing about the new penalty for not meeting the 95% participation rate, the lowest obtainable scale score. And it was kind of like, I couldn't get my head around it. So I've got my head around it now. And I recommend you do too, because it's a big difference from how it was previously calculated. But as you know, all states are required to meet the 95% participation rate for English language arts, math, and science. The English language proficiency assessments, the ELPAC, were required by federal law to assess 100% of all students. And for the accountability purposes, there's a penalty imposed on schools and LEAs, districts, schools, and student groups that don't meet the 95% participation rate. So this year, it was going to be rolled out in 2020. And for some reason, I just thought, geez, wasn't this already rolled out? But no, it wasn't, because we had no dashboard in 2020. But now that we're back to it, the lowest obtainable scale score, the loss, is the penalty which will be assigned to schools, districts, and student groups not meeting that 95% participation rate. So the way it works is that you take basically your percentage. If you don't meet the 95% participation rate, every student below that 95% threshold is assigned the lowest obtainable scale score. And as you can see, those are pretty low, the -279 for ELA and -247 distance from standard, to bring you back up. So if you're short 10%, and I actually did this calculation for a real school the other day, what would happen if their participation rate from 2019, which was about 80% participation rate in 2019, if that were repeated this year, so to make up that 15%, using the old version, which was used to be applied, they still had their ELA status was very high. When I factored in the application of the loss to 107 students, which was what would be required to bring them up to the 95% participation rate, they dropped to a medium. Their status would have been a medium, which was they had a minus number, which for that was impacted there, put them in medium. But you can imagine if you weren't at a very high level to begin with, the application to loss could definitely bring your group down or your school down. So participation rate, it's definitely going to be a consideration this year. And we know a lot of parents may choose to opt out, or if parents are remote, it's going to be a lot more difficult. And I don't want to be too alarmist, but I think this is a really big consideration. And I definitely encourage you to read through that memo that went out, the flyer that just went out last week. And like I said, we have it on the Canvas page, but to get a better understanding of this, I was responding to a district who asked, like, how can we encourage students to participate, certainly at high school level, which is often where you see it, the higher level of attrition, students self-opting out. You can point to the early assessment program, the advantages of participating in CAASPP to take advantage of the early assessment program. But there are a variety of things that you may want to point to, and it certainly just does not reflect well, on a school, even though it's status only this year. If we get into what will be a status only of very low, is going to have a significant impact on the dashboard. So you'll see that shortly. The CDE included is preparing some communications to support LEAs with communicating this, the fall 2022 dashboard. That one-page flyer that they sent out via email around the application of the penalty for 95% participation rate is the first of many to come, and you'll see additional slides. A lot of this is just to help LEAs communicate with their communities about what the dashboard means, and to try to assuage concerns. It's been a very difficult few years, and we're just rolling out from underneath in terms of the way schools operate. So they're going to be providing LEAs with some key talking points. So stay tuned for more information from the CDE around the dashboard. The CDE was one of several states, or the state was offered this addendum template by the Department of Education, which is kind of a very different. There's a normal process for seeking changes to your ESEA plan, but this year the Department of Education put out this opportunity to temporarily modify your state plan, and the CDE is applying for it, and they got the board's approval to do that. And let me tell you what that includes, because it really gets down to the implications for identification purposes using the dashboard. So the proposal included 3 components. I'm not going to talk too long about the first 2. It's really more the third one that is most interesting, but they're looking at shifting forward the timelines for what the state reports out for progress, modifying the school quality indicator, which is another element that the state reports out to the feds, and then finally how they identify schools who are eligible for CSI or ATSI for the assistance categories. And that would include changing the identification frequency, changing the methodology, at least temporarily, and then revising the entrance and exit criteria. So in terms of shifting the timeline, the California's long-term goal and interim progress for academic achievement, graduation rate, and progress in achieving English language proficiency, we had no assessments or dashboard for a couple of years, so they're seeking to extend the timeline for 2 years to make up for those 2 years that we missed. So that should be pretty straightforward. The addendum offered this as one of those flexibilities. In addition, the state already reports out to the Department of Education 2 separate indicators that they are identify for school indicator. School quality indicator, because college and career indicator won't be available until 2023 because of the missing assessment data that I mentioned earlier. They're proposing that they would use the suspension rate indicator only until the college and career indicator is reportable again. But then in terms of identifying schools for assistance for ATSI and CSI, the state had already put forward the old model, which used the dashboard colors, but now that because of the limitations imposed by AB 130, which are going to limit our ability to report on colors, the status and change, which generates the colors, the state is looking to make this one-time change for the 2022 dashboard, using just the 5 local indicators and the status level from the 5 available state measures, so no CCI, but the additional 5 measures that will be there will be the way that the determination is made for CSI, ATSI. I will say also that this is how they'll be using the dashboard to make differentiated assistance, so the technical assistance, which is the state's requirement for LEAs. So the change in methodology, as we talked about earlier, the English Learner Progress Indicator is a good sample of that. So in 2019, when we didn't have a color available because we didn't have sufficient data, what the CDE did was they took some calculations, they looked at data, and they said, what would we use to provide a proxy for red, and they determined that very low, if your cut score was very low, that would be a legitimate and valid use. So the status level would be picked based on just your instead of colors, your colors would be assigned based on your status level. So very low would be the proxy for all the state indicators. And they went through the process that they had before and said, okay, let's just replace red with the terms very low. And they came up with, they had to come up with some potential measures of how they would determine CSI and ATSI. This is very specific to CSI, ATSI, not differentiated systems, just want to be clear. So if you looked at the schools with all very low status, if you looked at schools with all very low status, but one other status, if you looked at schools with 5 or more indicators where the majority were very low, I mean, you looked at the schools with all very low and low status. These were 4 different criteria that they wanted to look at in order to determine CSI, ATSI. And there is a requirement for CSI that we have 5% of the lowest performing Title I schools identified. And so they wanted to see how that would work out. So they looked at 2019 data, and they know that there are some errors that are introduced into the process when you move from the calculations from status and change to just looking at status. They looked at the 2019 dashboard, and they ran this model to see what would be identified under each of those 4 different criteria. So they found that they, after removing the high schools, the Title I high schools that qualified for grad rate, because that's a separate category that they pull out off the top. For the remaining schools, Title I schools, of which they had to identify 5%, if they used all the schools in 2019 that would have had very low status for all of the available indicators, they would have only had 163 schools, which only amounts to 2.4% of the schools. So they've got to reach that 5%. If they looked at the second criteria, which would be an all very low except for 1, they would have then bumped up. And this is a cumulative running number in the middle. So this was inclusive of the first 163. But if they looked at all very low except 1, then they moved up to 335 schools, which is at 4.9% of the schools. So they're right there, and they looked at the numbers. They needed eight more schools, and their assumption is that they actually will, based on all the impact of COVID and everything, it's very likely that they'll have at least 8 more schools who identified as have a dashboard of all very low except for 1. And then finally, they ran the numbers for the majority very low and the very low and low, and you can see the numbers exceed that 5% threshold by a long shot, but they don't want to, they don't want to necessarily identify all those schools. So their plan moving forward is just to use 1 and 2. So for the low performing eligibility determinations. So they're really going to look at if a school is identified on the dashboard as with all very low indicators, and or is identified all very low except for 1. And note that high schools have fewer indicators. They don't have chronic absenteeism, so different grade spans have different numbers of indicators, but within the indicators you have, if you got all very low or all very low except for 1, they expect that those are going to be the schools that fill that criteria are going to be eligible for identification for CSI, ATSI. They think if they have to, they could extend to that 3rd one. They don't believe they're going to have to. And finally, they definitely don't think that they're going to need to use that 4th criteria for low performing eligibility due to the increased level of error. This has come up a lot, and people have asked me, and I think at some point, everybody's wondering, well, gee, is it fair to have the same cut scores given everything that we've gone through at this point? And they did consider it, and they actually had been talking about revisiting the cut scores at the 7-year mark, which would have been about now, but of course we didn't have a dashboard for 2 years. So the following was reported at the state board meeting, that they consulted with both their technical design group and the California Practitioners Advisory Group. And although there were some people definitely who were concerned from the Practitioners Advisory about the impact of not changing the cut scores, they decided that for now, they're not going to change any of the cut scores. So the determinations for what to use for identifying that very low status will be based on the existing cut scores. And just as a reminder of what those are, they do differ. So TK through 12 are a unified school district or an elementary school district. Those columns are represented in the far left, and then a high school district on the far right. So there are some differences, but these are the cut scores for the very low status. So these would be the implications if you wanted to go back and look at the status from 2019, just to see what impact that might have had on some of your schools and what might be identified for CSI or ATSI. That would be one way to determine whether or not you might be identified for CSI, ATSI. The other implication I will say is that we have a 1-year list for Williams that came out, and that 1-year list included schools that were already identified for CSI, ATSI, but they're going to revisit that list again once we have a new list for CSI, ATSI. So there are implications for being identified on the Williams list if the school is currently not identified for CSI, ATSI, but maybe after the fall 2022 dashboard comes out. So lots of implications there. Just a few more accountability updates. I'm going to turn over to the assessment team, and some interesting things coming forward. The state announced that we're going to be releasing this student level college and career indicator data through a new portal called the Student Online Accountability Record Status, or SOARS system. And the advantage there, and I think if any of you have been grappling with the college and career indicator and its complexity, you may wonder, well, how did a student, why were they identified for this but not this? Of course, right now we're only really reflecting the college and career measures. That's all we have access to. But this new system will allow you, you'll be receiving access. Probably the accountability coordinator or maybe the CalPADS coordinator at the district will receive access to this new SOARS system. I'm not sure the exact release date. They said spring 2022, but that'll give you student level data so you can see all the areas in which a student was identified, whether it was college or career measures. And so that'll be a really handy tool if you want to kind of unpack your college and career readiness plans and look at your data to see how you can make improvements there. The state's also working on 2 new potential measures for college and career indicator, this state seal of civic engagement, as well as industry certifications. These won't happen immediately. These will be added on top of some of the other new measures that were included on the 2020 data, but the other measures of career readiness that the state is looking at to expand the role. There are weighing factors currently as to when to include the California Science Test on the dashboard. There are a lot of implications for that, including trying to strike a balance of academic and non-academic indicators. So it won't happen automatically. And I guess the good news that it's not being included in the fall 2022 is there won't be any participation rate penalty for CAASPP yet. But they also need ample opportunity for students to participate in the CAASPP so they can make sure that their cut scores are accurate. And so last year we had a very low participation rate, obviously. So this year will be an opportunity to get a much larger cohort of students tested on the CAASPP so they can challenge their cut scores and the implications there. And then finally, I've been talking about this for a while and still have yet to see it. The teacher assignment data file, it's still being processed. It's a very complex file that was supposed to be used to populate your accountability report cards, school accountability report cards. It's still forthcoming, and you will see this populating those SARCs pretty soon. And when it comes out, it'll also be available for the local indicator reporting, which will be done for the priority 1, and that'll take place, that'll need to be provided to your governing board in conjunction with the approval of the LCAP, and then you can use it for reporting the local indicator when you upload it to the dashboard. I'm going to stop there. That's the end of my question or my accountability pieces. I know it's a lot to go through. And I saw that we had a couple questions there. So for the California school dashboard, will that be applied to both the district and the impacted schools, or just the? So Sarah, the penalty is being applied. The penalty is applied to districts, schools, and individual student groups. So if the student group is large enough to be measured on the dashboard, so that would be the concern, that if you have a student group that does not have 95% participation rate, they could definitely be brought down into that very low status as a student group, which for the purposes of differentiated assistance, that's where that really has an impact, where you look at a student group who is red in 2 indicators, or red and orange for the academic indicator, and red in 1 other indicator. Yeah, Sarah, thank you, Yvette. By district, do you mean LEA? Elizabeth, maybe you can clarify on that question. Just drop it in the chat. But yeah, generally we mean.
Question before, yeah, you answered the question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Yvette, it does seem very punitive, and certainly I would be very concerned about my students with disabilities student group who are already. We haven't done the calculations. I know other district or other county offices have done just some modeling, looked at numbers, and certainly for differentiated assistance, I think we expect to see an increase. We're still trying to sort out, by the way, the state law surrounding, not talking we at the county, but rather at the state, whether the differentiated assistance for charter schools would go into effect this fall or another year from now. They need to have 2 years worth of data, and I think based on AB 130 that the data from 2019 would not be applicable. There's some confounding information or in the language around AB 130, but we expect to get clarification around that soon, and I will send that out. But I think that we probably wouldn't identify charter schools for DA until 2023, but districts would be identified for DA, re-identified this fall, and then schools for CSI, ATSI this fall. And so that you've got a lot of considerations there. And I don't see any other questions right now. And let's see, so I'm gonna roll into our assessment update. If you have any additional questions, please drop them in the chat. We'll make sure we get back around to those. So I just wanted to answer, there were a couple of questions that came up that ran related to the PFT. And I know I fielded a lot of these questions coming in from the field as well. The question is, has a final determination been made as to whether the PFT could be administered remotely? The state's response is there are no provisions within the law or within the test administration manual allowing LEAs to administer virtually. So you must complete that in person. If you have students who are on remote learning for the year or an independent study, you have to bring them into test. And my daughter actually went into test the other day. She's an independent study for only PE, but they had other students from their regular independent study being tested. So you probably already have started that. The other question, a little bit trickier, related to the application of the waivers that are available for students. So the question arose, so what is the CD's recommendation to unified and high school districts on how they can best be compliant with PFT testing and still meet the requirements outlined in section Ed Code 51241B1, which is the exemption provided if a student were to meet for the last 2 years of PE or for 2 years of PE, if they've met 5 of 6 of the healthy fitness zones on the PFT. And the state's response to that was that they don't have any recommendations, only that LEAs complete the PFT as prescribed in 21-22 and advise students of the additional exemptions in 51241 and 51242. And they note that students didn't take the PFT in 2019-20 because of the COVID suspension, so they wouldn't have access to that exemption anyway. So they did state, and I'm just going to put this out there, but I really would be reluctant that if a district wanted to, they could administer and try to make the determinations for healthy fitness zones and take the body composition test themselves. However, they're not supporting it in any way, and they're not, basically there's a lot of concern around the implications of that. So it would be if a district wished to go out there on their own and do that, they aren't going to stop you. There's no penalty for doing it. At the same time, I would be very reluctant. There's a reason why the CDE has backed away from using the healthy fitness zones. However, they did say that a district could make those determinations on their own if they chose to, but they really strongly encourage districts to look to the other waiver accommodations. That's it for me. Hillary, any questions here that?
We have a few, but we also have some people in the audience who are responding. Let me go back up. I know NGS, so the participation, or sorry, for the physical fitness test, they're only collecting participation rate and not setting the actual scores. Is that correct? We had
That's
several people
correct.
respond to that for the SARC.
Yes.
Norma asked, do we have an official template that we should be using to collect participation rate?
Actually, yeah, Norma, I see there's no official template. Actually, the state did put out a template from the standpoint of its individual student response. It's actually loaded in our Canvas page now. However, for reality check is there'd be a lot of hand tabulation if you were to use an individual score reporting for each person. I think a lot of districts, and maybe that's, I don't know if somebody had a link, but a lot of folks are either using what's in their data management system or using a spreadsheet that they can record everything for easier tabulation of participated in all the elements. Thank you, Elizabeth. So you have the Google Sheet that you shared. Thank you. And I hope if that's okay with you, Elizabeth, we'll make this available. We'll put the link available in our follow-up Q&A. Eric is already implementing artificial intelligence to determine, always on the cutting edge of things, Eric. All right, I am going to hand things over now to my colleagues, Stephanie and Stephen, for updates on LPAC and CAASPP.
Thanks, Evan. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully you're able to see that okay. Okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. My name is Stephanie Fortunato. My colleague here is Stephen Bartlett from the assessment unit here at LACOE. So we're happy to be able to share all kinds of great updates. I know you're just coming off of a lot of updates from Evan and Hillary, so the fun continues. Just to give you kind of an overview, we're gonna continue discussing State Board of Education updates that came down the line. We'll talk about some LPAC updates. There were some really informative copy sessions from the CDE these last couple of months since we've met. And so just to highlight some of those features as well, we'll talk about remote testing and Moodling and some pieces about test settings and monitoring testing, stairs, and also wait times. And we'll also take a look at some really key important communications. And finally, we'll end with some professional learning opportunities. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Stephen. You'll start us off with some State Board of Education updates.
Right. In the March 2022 meeting, the CDE sought approval for some minor revisions to initial LPAC, initial alternate LPAC SSRs in order to reflect the most recent updates to test administration, ensure the key information regarding student performance is communicated clearly to parents and guardians, and that proposed revisions to next year's initial LPAC, initial alternate LPAC SSRs are intended to ensure that key information is communicated clearly. Turning to LPAC updates, the SSRs that LEAs provide to parents and guardians are of course available electronically, and initial LPAC SSRs are available throughout the year, usually within 2 days of completion of all 4 domains. Summative LPAC SSRs should be initially released in June of 2022, with final releases slated for August of 2022. If your district elected and paid for the innovative video student score reports, those should be made available in July of 2022. Moving on to ETS reminders. ETS reminds us that communication is key when reclassification is imminent, preferring intra-district communication to stairs cases, and requesting that reset appeals for students who have started or completed summative LPAC testing but have already been reclassified. In addition to the extensive CalPADS update flash 219 guidance on reclassification, let's hit the slide. This guidance becomes pressing this week as we move into the CalPADS scheduled downtime tomorrow, with CalPADS now unavailable from tomorrow, Wednesday, April 6th, 2022 at 5 p.m. to Monday, April 11th, 2022 at 5 p.m. So please inform test examiners if students are going to be reclassified to ensure students are not tested erroneously. Moving on to stopping markers. A few years ago, you may have received a superintendent email on this issue, or a superintendent letter on this issue. Stopping markers are presented at every grade level and every domain to reduce frustration for students who may score at the novice English learner level. Please remind test examiners that the stopping marker is followed by an end test button as described by DFAs, directions for administration. The end test button should be used only when there have been no responses or no correct responses prior to the stopping marker. So that letter indicated situations where students had scored correctly prior to that stopping marker being used. Please ensure that all test examiners have been trained and certified in Moodle and are familiar with the DFAs before administering the test and understand the directions for how and when to use those stopping markers. If we move on to alternate LPAC, as you are undoubtedly aware, the assessment window for the alternate LPAC operational field test was extended to May 31st, 2022, now matching the anticipated end date for the summative LPAC window for 2021-22. And so if we move on, we'll see that when the testing window for the alternate LPAC operational field test was extended to match the summative LPAC end date, we received a lot of questions on whether this was related to low testing rates, which might affect the standard setting and release of the initial alternate LPAC. And the good news is that the timeline for the release of the initial alternate LPAC is on track and has not changed as far as we have been notified, with an expected release in time for summer initial LPAC testing this summer. Moving on into back to school for next year. As we move into endemic status, CDE recommends the return to summer initial LPAC testing. LEAs that pre-enroll students in order to assess them in the summer with the initial LPACs or initial alternate LPACs are able to place them appropriately based on their ELAS from the first day of school. So they're encouraging us to ensure that LPAC testing is done in the summer, the initial LPAC testing. They do note that that may be an increase in workload if there's an exit required prior to the beginning of the actual school year, but that LEAs should support each other by assessing those eligible students only once during the summer and allow that assessment to determine the student's ELAS status, even if determined by a different district. I know in terms of those claims for funds for those assessments, you get, if you are the first to test, you are the receiver of those LPAC funds. Moving on to Stephanie, I think you've got the next section.
Yeah, so going over some of the updates from the recent coffee sessions, we're going to look at remote testing and Moodle trainings and monitoring testing, and we'll also talk about some tips to minimize some of those stairs cases, some reminders about the coordinator designation forms, wait times, Moodle support, and we'll talk about some recent videos that were released as well. So let's go ahead and start with some remote testing updates, or really just mostly reminders here. So first off, you'll see that just as a reminder, the remote administration of Smarter Balanced and the California Science Assessments it's an available option for LEAs for students who are enrolled in independent studies. So just as an additional reminder, there is no remote administration option for any of those alternate assessments. It's really designed for those students who are receiving that remote instruction. So if you have students who are receiving in-person instruction, they should continue to be tested in person. In terms of the video permissions in TOMS, making sure that they have that video permission set to yes in TOMS, indicating that parents have also been notified of those requirements for remote testing, which includes also that video monitoring piece of students during the test administration. But it's important to note that LEAs are not required to collect or track any kind of parent or guardian signatures for remote testing. And then finally, parents and guardians do retain the right to opt out their students from assessments. The choice to opt out is made by assessment, and the parent or guardian must provide a written request. So it's really important to make sure that You're documenting any communication with your independent study families and students who don't participate in remote testing, and documenting it in your student information system or in student cumulative records. And it is important to note that those students, as Evan was talking about earlier, do also figure into that 95% participation rate. So just an additional reminder for you. So moving on to Moodle, this is not any new information, but just really a reminder about those required Moodle completions. So of course, for the summative LPAC, the LEA certification course, and any of your test examiners must be fully calibrated. But what is new this year is that test administrator tutorial in CAASPP. It is optional, but also for any of you who have students that are taking the CAA, making sure that test examiners are required to complete that Moodle requirement for any of the CAA administrations. But it is nice to be able to use that test administrator tutorial. It's an option for you to be able to train your staff to make sure that they are fully prepared. So you would have received an email mid-February that had that information to primary coordinators that have the enrollment keys and that piece of information. This is really just sort of a snapshot of what that Moodle piece looks like for that test administrator tutorial. So you can see it provides an overview of CAASPP. It talks about how to prepare for CAASPP, the actual administration, and then some additional resources there as well. So speaking of Moodle, I thought this was a super handy thing that the CDE put together. There are so many of these new Moodle components, and oftentimes the questions that CDE, ETS, we receive is, how long does it take to actually complete those Moodle requirements? And so this is a really nice table. There's a link here that will take you to it as well that shows you what are the estimated times. They're all averages based on, experiences for those who've completed it. So those, it shows you the assessments at the top, the audience, who the target audience is for, what the specific training is, and again, the estimated time to be able to complete it. So just a nice reference piece for you for those of you who get those questions. Same thing about, gosh, how long is it actually going to take? All right, so let's talk about uploading test settings and assignments. At a recent coffee session, it was really brought to their attention from a lot of the success agents that a lot of the questions that they're getting are about common errors that were happening when staff was uploading test settings or files or test assignments into TOMS. And so one of the common issues that's causing the errors is uploading test settings that don't match the assessments that they're trying to upload those test settings for. So one of the things that they noted is, look, a lot of people don't know that there are these extra tabs with information within these template documents from TOMS. So there's that main Excel spreadsheet template that has all the columns that you need, but there's also an information tab and also a test settings file spec tab that have extra program abbreviations as well. So you'll see the little blue table there that shows you kind of a key to a lot of those abbreviations. E for Smarter Balanced, for ELA, M for Mathematics, S for CAST, and so on. So all of those different assignments, test assessments have their own code. And so you want to make sure to check that information to make sure that it matches so that you're not receiving that error. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop share, but then reshare again and just kind of show you a little demonstration of how to go through and where you can find that in TOMS. So give me just a second. I'll go ahead and reshare my screen again. So to find that template document that we were just referring to, if I'm logging in here to my TOMS account and selecting my role, if I'm going over here to the Students tab right here, and I'm going to select the tab here that shows Upload. And then I can select the type of file that I want to upload here. So in this case, I can either select test assignments if I'm assigning a student specific assessment, or then those test settings. So let's look at both. So this is for the test assignments one. And you'll see once I select next, there's the option here to actually look at the template. So let's take a look at what that template looks like. You'll see as soon as you select it, right down here on the bottom, I have my Excel file that already popped up. And this shows you an example, making sure that you're filling in that student SSID, that you're completing the administration window. Some of you may have different admin windows. You're completing this piece here for yes or no if a student is taking an alternate assessment. Same thing with the high school science, California Spanish assessment, anyone that needs to identify the delivery mode. And then here's also that piece for remote testing video permissions. So this is one of the test templates that you may be looking at. And then let's take a quick look at the other one as well. We'll go ahead and minimize this. So the other one, if I go back to the students tab here and look at upload, this one I'm going to pick the test settings template, and I'll go ahead and show you what that will look like. Again, we'll download the template. It'll appear pretty quickly here right on the bottom. And this is the one too where you can also see any students here, your SSID, but here are those abbreviations that you would refer to based on the different assessment that students might be taking. So pay attention to these ones here as well. They're super important. So those are really the two templates that you're going to be looking at. One here is the one for test settings, and then the other one we took a look at. And here on the bottom, right, here's those tabs right here, information tab. So make sure that you are looking at this background information. This one here has about test assignment file specs and then the actual template. So those were some of the common errors that CDE was noting. And so we just wanted to draw your attention as to where you could actually find those. So let's go back to a final piece here on monitoring. Oh gosh, and it took me right back to the very beginning. And we're caught up. Okay, perfect. So we know that many of you are all in the midst of your LPAC testing, and some of you are actually starting your CAASPP testing. You know, it's right around the corner for a lot of you. So now that it's really begun, making sure that you are monitoring, right? Monitoring becomes that piece that's more important than ever. So the CDE monitoring testing presentation link is included on this slide. It's a great reference for you. Has some really great tips in walking you through all of the different considerations for monitoring testing throughout your testing window. So you'll also want to use the checklist to learn what should be done, what needs to be done in the coming weeks and months as it pertains to monitoring testing. And also LEA coordinators should make sure that they're using the completion status system and the completion reports in TOMS to really ensure that students are tested before the close of your LEA's testing window. So you can view the test completion rates report and the web page and the video link that's on this page for guidance. It's really helpful and does a great job of walking you through those pieces of how to monitor testing. And it's also a great thing to be able to share with your test administrators or test examiners. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Stephen to talk about some tips to minimize STEERS cases.
Awesome. We've asked Marcus to be here to speak from the perspective of ETS. We want to encourage you to attend the coffee sessions hosted by CDE and ETS. So we've included a few slides from the March 11th coffee session as a reminder, and something if you haven't seen those, and we'll skip through these with just a few notes. So with the spring breaks coming so late in the year for many LEAs this year, we want you to be sure to have your reminder of we wanted to be sure to remind you of test expiration rules for the performance tasks. Performance tests now expire 15 calendar days rather than 10, but be sure to plan testing around spring break and weekends. So we understand that CalPAD's match process will update during the system change. So look out for issues with management of multiple identifiers coming up with this coming summer. If we go to the next slide, look out for guidance on reclassification with CalPAD's update flash 219, which describes reclassifying and reporting reclassified fluid English proficient students and rules for doing that. And of course, This is related to accidental summative administration of students who are reclassified. Be sure to be communicating with your reclassification staff. Let's skip through the next two and look at cell phone use. So on the March 25th, let's move back one. March 25th, assessment spotlight, focus on test security. I wanted Nick say this was a March 11th presentation. One more, the cell phone. Yeah, that one. Okay, March 25th. 2022 assessment spotlight was very helpful on this issue as well. It includes a focus on what not to report in STARS, providing helpful limits on this particular issue. So for example, if an electronic device was used after testing, if a student used an electronic device after the individual testing was completed during a test session, you would report only if the student completed testing, but the LEA can verify the device is being used to help other students who are engaged in the test session, or an LEA policy explicitly requires invalidation for electronic device use anytime during a test session. So very helpful guidance on STARS scenarios, and we encourage you to check out those resources and those clarifications of the policy as stated in the documentation. Moving on, we want to remind you of the coordinator designation. Deadlines are upon us for the 2022-23 school year. Just this past week on April 1st was a deadline to designate an LEA coordinator of the LPAC, and coming up on July 1st is deadline to submit the LEA coordinator designation for CAASPP. And both of these must be completed from the superintendent's account to make sure you are coordinating efforts with them. If one has not been designated, then you'll when you're logging into My Toms at a glance, will display a message for you. If we move on to the next one, in the extensive latest news and tips for the LPAC, for the CAASPP administration, tips and tricks for a smooth administration year, listings on both the LPAC and CAASPP homepages, ETS provides some helpful wait times to help us with our patients when we are changing settings. I'm sorry, I had to plug in my computer here, and ensuring that we understand how long it will take to have certain things available. Approximately 1 hour after LEA creates a new user, it should be available. A user is able to administer some of his assessments 36 minutes to 60 minutes after his user signed the security affidavit. New students are able to test 2 days from CalPAD's posting. Eligible students are able to take alternate assessments 2 days after coordinators assign the alternate assessment, and so on. A lot of our issues when we're in testing and are attempting to test and cannot test related to procedural issues, including signing test security agreements and having students in those systems. So be sure to make sure those are managed before testing. We go into the next slide. We wanted to point out that as we move forward this year, the language of the guidance for alternate assessments is favoring more and more finding a way to assess students for these assessments, which must be administered in person, including recommendations for home visits or bringing remote students in for assessment. Completion rate, of course, for LPAC continues to be 100% and greater than 95% for the CAASPP assessment. So provided here a few of the Q&As from recent coffee sessions, and the first Q&A there is posted on the LPAC's homepage, recommending LEAs or giving the option for LEAs to send individuals out to students. So another one of our changes in guidance as we move towards endemic status. I believe you're in the next slide, Stephanie.
Yeah, so just continuing with that conversation about the alternate assessments, in this case for science, now is a really good time for you to make sure that you're checking your records, to make sure that any students who are designated to take the CAA for science are being administered those performance tasks as intended. So in order for students to really be counted and having participated, and in order to be able to receive a student score report later this fall, you must make sure that those students are completing all 4 of those embedded performance tasks by the end of the school's instructional calendar, or they're noting July 15th, whichever is coming first. So you'll notice the first item there's the 4 embedded performance tasks, which have been available since September. And then with this assessment, making sure, we mentioned this earlier, but that your test examiners that are administrating any of those test parts are also making sure that they're completing those test examiner tutorials. And then finally, making sure that you're checking your records so that students who are taking the CAA for science are being administered the performance tasks as intended. So just some important key points there. Also, CDE has released a few new videos. Perhaps you've had a chance to check them out, but there are some live links here that will take you to them. An Understanding SIRS video. For those of you who are using that Moodle test administrator tutorial, a nice video that will walk you through how to access that. And then we also mentioned earlier about monitoring testing and how important that is. And so there's a nice video there that will also provide some guidance. There are some past and upcoming training opportunities you can always access. You can find these through the CAASPP site under the trainings tab. So you'll find there is something, some information about pre-test virtual training series that's going to be coming up, the new coordinator webinars, coffee sessions, and then this summer they'll be using they'll be providing a series on using assessment data. So always just kind of keep an eye out on that tab for any upcoming training opportunities, or if you need to go back and reference any as well. So there's some recent communications emails that have been coming at us. It seems like, gosh, almost like a couple each week. Stephen, you want to go ahead and talk about just this first one here about the SSR distribution?
Of course, in the urgent section of the April monthly email for CAASPP and LPAC, both those emails, there's 2 separate emails, is a guidance to prepare for distribution of electronic SSRs. This begs the question, of course, when will we see the scores? And as of March 18th, 2022, the ETS score release date estimates based on current testing numbers are a June 2022 release for SBAC, ELA, and math, June 2022 for California alternates for ELA and math, California science tests, and the summative LPAC, all June 2022. The initial release of summative LPAC, if you recall, back in the days of paper SSRs, we would receive an initial release and then a final release for the last 10%. And that secondary release is going to be in August 2022 of the summative LPAC with a similar structure, the major release in June 2022, and then a subsequent final release in August 2022, including those grade 2 through kindergartners through grade 2 writing answer books that were returned in time. California Spanish assessment not expected until September 22, call for science November 22, and alternate epoch operational field tests somewhere in summer 2022 after standard setting is completed and SBE, State Board of Education, approves the threshold. And of course, initial LPAC should be available within 2 hours of completion of all domains. Be sure to notify parents of the availability of and provide alternate means for acquiring those assessment results. I think you're next, Stephanie.
Yeah, so there were also some recent emails. One came March 25th. This is the tips and tricks email. We referenced it earlier. There's a link here that will take you directly to it, but it's fantastic. It has really a list of some of the most common questions and answers that are being asked. And so please do reference that to get some additional guidance for you. Also, the last couple of weeks of assessment spotlights had some really informative pieces in there, making sure that, you're not required to report on certain stairs or appeals processes. Stephen kind of talked about these earlier, but electronic devices that may be used after testing, or any cases with a 12-month English learner student, parent guardian exemptions. These are all pieces that do not require you to file any kind of stairs cases. And then again, just as another reminder about that CalPADS downtime, we referred to it earlier, about that starting tomorrow at 5 p.m. So just be mindful, especially for those of you who are in the midst, which is probably all of us, of that LPAC testing going on right now. And so finally, just a couple of professional learning opportunities. It looks like my screen went out. Oh, let me go ahead and come back to that page. For those of you who are attending already our Wednesdays at 1, that continues. We're going to be hosting that through May 18th. Feel free to join us any of the weeks that you're able to. And it's just really a nice space for us to be able to talk about, how test administration's going, any questions or concerns or challenges. It's been fantastic to be able to hear from you in the field as to how it's going, but it's also been a great opportunity to share resources. So we've had some fantastic resources that have been shared from districts across the county. And so everyone has been like, hey, take this, don't reinvent it for yourself. Elizabeth, I know, shared her PFT template here. Sarah Nisos has provided, we've had all sorts of districts who've been providing just fantastic information. So we invite you to join us. And then also we're going to be hosting an Administrator Institute on May 25th. So we invite you to join us. It's really geared for our school and district leaders to start that conversation about how to plan for using IABs to support academic achievement all year long. So we know that before you know it, the next school year will be upon us. So we want to start having that conversation about talking about the advantages of implementing a system of IAB use. And so it'll be geared just towards administrators at the end of May. And then finally, also keep an eye out for a date in June that's coming up. For those of you who may have a new LPAC coordinator for the new school year, the accountability team and the assessment team are going to be joining together to provide that new coordinator training for those LPAC LEA coordinators. So they won't be receiving an email because they're not noted. So just make sure that you're forwarding that information to them, or send us an email if you know who your coordinator is going to be for the upcoming year, so we can make sure that if they're new, they are included. There will also be a date in September for any new CAASPP coordinators. So we're working really to solidify both of those dates. So our contact information's here. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions along the way. And that's all that we have, which is a lot from the assessment unit. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Stephanie and Stephen. Let me just bring up this. We were supposed to have Marcus join us, and I did not see him unless he's got a
no, I'm here. Hello.
You are here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
No problem.
Awesome. Thank you, Marcus. Well, wait, let me bring up your slide.
Sure, of course.
There you go. We're joined by
there I am, yeah.
One of, I'm sure you've all had an opportunity to meet Marcus in preparing for CAASPP administration, and you're so timely in your responses, and we're happy to have you here.
Sure.
I know you've probably been listening to the you're posing as Margarita. That's how you slipped in unnoticed.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had changed my
okay.
name to
Okay.
sorry. It did say that first, but I had changed it to my name. I'm sorry if I was incognito with you all.
Okay, well, so we have Marcus is the best. So
Thanks, guys.
Do you have
Appreciate it.
any specific updates that you would like to share with us today, Marcus?
Yes, so I've updated some of the slides that I used in my last presentation. Stephen, yourself, and Stephanie have done a wonderful and beautiful job in actually presenting a lot of the information that I have here as well. But I have a couple things to go over as far as the remote administration, so I'll pull that up right now. But a couple things I did want to address. I saw some in the chats. I didn't respond. But as far as I know that a lot of the SIS or the SACE templates that are provided that many of the LEAs use, one thing from personal experience, I believe either Chris Mogia or Eric had said it in the chat. It does take a little bit of finessing as far as the information from SACE to the TOMS template. I usually don't recommend the SACE template because there's a lot of information there that is not pertinent to the TOMS upload. And I believe it was also mentioned in the chat that there's a lot of adjusting, and they are correct. There's a couple of fields of information that won't work with the TOMS template specifically. So those have to be removed, or else you'll actually receive errors when trying to upload those as well. So that does happen. Just so you guys are aware of that. We usually recommend using the TOMS template more, if anything, not the SACE or the SIS template. Really helps cut down on the errors and also the issues that LEAs incur. Ruth, so SACE doesn't usually talk to TOMS directly. The way that works is we derive all of our information from CalPads directly into TOMS. So anything, if you have your SACE hooked up to CalPads in which it imports information from SACE, then anything that is listed in your CalPads should automatically go to TOMS as well. Sorry, before I get into my presentation, just answering a couple of these questions in the chat. One thing I did also want to address as far as the security forms, Stephen did a great job in regards to the table we've provided on both CAASPP and the ELPAC sites about the 30 to 60 minute wait. One thing I do want to remind everybody who has users that they've given roles to, they need to make sure that they're logging into TOMS completely in order to be prompted with the security forms. What happens most of the times is a user will be given access in TOMS with the role. They'll stop at the point of actually creating their login credentials and their password, and then they'll stop. And then, weeks or months could go by, and then when the actual time of testing comes into play, what happens is they'll log into the TA interface and they'll automatically see the interim assessments, but based on what the role they were given, they sometimes won't see the alternate assessments or the summative assessments, anything of that nature. And it's because they weren't prompted in the first place in TOMS because they stopped at that one point of just creating their login credentials. They didn't go all the way through TOMS in order for those electronic forms to appear. So just be aware of that because it does cause some testing issues, and I've come across it fairly recently with a lot of LEAs. Let me go ahead and share my screen. If there's any questions, I can take them while I'm blowing this up for you guys. Edgar, so I do see your question about SIRS and previous IAB results. The previous results shouldn't be erased. They should also be displayed there as well. Let me share my screen here real quick. Okay.
Can I just add a piece about that too, Marcus, with what the question was? I think if you are administering those IABs more than once, I think the key is just to make sure, Edgar, that you're selecting the session ID for that specific assessment that was administered the second time around, if that's the case. So
correct. Yeah, they should. Okay. All of them, all the previous attempts should be listed in SIRS as well. They're not usually erased. If you select from those different session IDs, you should be able to see them. Correct. So this is just a brief overview. A lot of what was covered already by yourself, Stephanie, Stephen, and Evan in regards to test examiners and administrators. And I also did note what I was speaking to the effect of earlier. Please note that they will need to log into TOMS fully to be prompted with the security forms. If they stop at just creating their login credentials, what's going to happen is their role is still going to be active, but again, when the time comes to administer and they access the TA interface, what's going to happen is they won't be presented with the correct tests. Say, for example, somebody has a test examiner role for CAASPP and they need access to the alternate assessments. If they didn't sign those security forms beforehand, what will happen is when they access the TA interface, the California alternate assessments will not appear for them. It's because the forms hadn't been signed. Question?
Marcus, I have a quick question for you.
Sure,
This is Ruth from Pomona, and I'm sorry to keep belaboring the point here, because
no problem.
I have been going back and forth with the persons who manage the SACE system in our district here.
Mhm.
And we have a little bit of miscommunication as to what is supposed to eventually automatically link to SACE. And we've been going back and forth. So we did have a little bit of an issue with entering accommodations.
Okay.
So this is the whole thing. So it's the whole thing about special ed correcting any issues on SACE, downloading files. There seems to be like a dead period where we can't do anything to correct or enter any accommodations while students are in that correction period, and then things automating automatically. There just seems to be a real disconnect with what's going on with SACE, TOMS, and CalPADS.
Okay. For the testing settings that you're using, are you uploading them manually or are you selecting them manually in TOMS?
So because of the issues that our district has had with uploads, we have instructed our sites to hand input accommodations. And yes, it is
Mhm.
considerable work for the school sites. Yes.
So if you have any of the files you'd like to share, feel free to email me. I can definitely double check anything that might be happening. Is there a specific error message that you're receiving that I can
No,
address?
so what's going on is that this is the example that it's kind of boiled down to.
Okay.
Special ed has to clean up their errors on SACE, and some of the errors are students that have like initial IEPs or
Mhm.
renewing of an IEP or what have you. But because it takes the special ed department, 2 months to make these corrections, those kids are sitting in that correction pool, and I can't do anything to enter accommodations for new IEPs or
Gotcha. Okay.
initial IEPs because they're sitting on these corrections, and
Okay.
it's taking too long for us to be able to get the students to test.
Okay, sure. If I may ask, is your CalPads in sync or connected to your SACE in any way, as far as students who require that IEP or 504?
And I don't know that I can answer that question, to be very honest with
Okay,
you. So I will find that out.
sure. Yeah, that'd be really helpful. As
And
far
then,
as the SACE itself, we don't, because there's so many different programs of student information systems used across the state. We're not directly involved with the SIS itself or the CalPads. However, anything that goes into TOMS, we usually derive all of that direct information from CalPads. So
CalPADS. Okay, but
yeah,
there
most.
isn't
Mhm.
anything that is direct. So there isn't anything directly going from SACE into TOMS. That is correct, right?
Correct, because
Okay,
all the information that we import from into TOMS as far as student demographic information is from CalPads directly.
CalPADS. Thank you.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So I'm not sure if any other LEAs have had this particular issue, but as far as SACE itself, usually I have not come across saying, oh yeah, we just have our SACE system plugged right into TOMS, because CalPads is what we're pulling from directly. So anything that they upload in SACE that they think is going to be in TOMS, that wouldn't be the case, because CalPads is the sole source of information for demographic
Okay.
information that we pull from, at least into TOMS. So, so do you have another question? Sorry. Okay. So moving on with some points of remote administration as well. I believe this was also addressed, but I just want to go over it. If the test examiner is administering remotely, just please ensure that the students have that remote video permissions set to Y. And that can be done either manually through the student profile in TOMS or actually through an upload of the test assignments, I believe. They should be able to indicate that as well. So at least a minimum of 24, if not 48 hours prior to the student testing. And I've also provided a couple of screenshots of some error messages that appear when this permissions is not set to Y. One big thing as we move forward with CAASPP testing that I do want to make sure that everybody's checking at the TA and the test examiner level. Before permitting a student to actually be permitted into a session, just make sure that they're checking the eyeball icon in the TA interface. I believe it should be under the session attributes button in the interface. So they want to make sure that if a student has a specific test setting, whether that be a designated support or a accommodation, they just want to make sure that they're checking that eyeball icon just to ensure that it's actually listed there. Now, if the specific test setting that the student requires is not listed there, the TA or the test examiner would want to deny approval first and then follow up with their site or LEA level coordinator just to ensure that the test settings have been uploaded and manually selected and or saved for those students. The last thing here is I've gotten this email and chat fairly often. Many of the test examiners are looking for the scripts for the CAASPP, ELA and math and CAST and so forth. Now, the scripts themselves in prior administration years were actually PDFs by themselves. However, I believe for the past 2 administration years, a lot of those scripts and the DFAs have actually been integrated into the online test administration manual. So if they're looking for a separate PDF, it's not going to be available just as a PDF by itself, but it should still allow them to print that specific chapter, and or if they just want to use online to read those DFAs or scripts while they're actually administrating, they can do so as well.
Yeah,
Some
Marcus,
of a new,
this is Evan.
Yeah.
We actually, one of our network members, Sarah Nitzos from Wiseburn, has graciously shared in the chat some PDFs that she generated for her.
Oh yeah, I think I recall that. It was in one of the
Yeah,
coffee sessions.
it was
Mr.
in one of
Martin
the
was
coffee
talking about.
sessions too. So
Perfect.
we've shared those both on our Canvas page, and Sarah just dropped them
Great.
into the chat as well. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you again, sir. Appreciate that. Yeah. Okay, so this one, let's go to the next one here. Okay, so I've included a lot of the actual messages that will appear on either this is going to be most likely the student interface. As you can see, the first one listed here showing no tests available at this time is a fairly common error message that appears a lot of the time. When no tests are available and that error message appears, most of the time it's because there's either a test assignment change in TOMS, and it's either currently changing and updating that assignment, and it was updated less than 24 hours ago. Anytime there's a change in TOMS for a student test assignment, whether they go from, for example, the Smarter Balanced ELA and Math to the California Alternate Assessment, and that is changed or updated, we just need to allow for the test delivery system to make that change as well. So that's that error message listed there where it says no tests are available at this time. That's most commonly associated with the change of a test assignment. The next one is student unable to log in due to an inactive test. So this is just an example on the LPAC side, but it does refer to CAASPP as well. It'll just say it'll have the different tests listed there. If it says inactive and it says you have no more opportunities for this test, a lot of these error messages are usually followed by a series of numbers as well, as you can see there in the parentheses. Sorry about that. The student has already completed all the eligible opportunities for this test. So one way you can actually confirm that is within TOMS. Now, it's not going to be the report section in TOMS and the report button, but if you go to the link section in TOMS, I'll show you that a little bit later as well, there is a completion status report section that has a little bit more, I wouldn't say live time, but a little bit quicker of a turnaround time as far as when a student actually completes a test as opposed to the reports in TOMS. The reports in TOMS, I believe, filters by different criteria as well. So there might be a bit of a delay in when a student actually finishes a test, but in the completion report link section in TOMS, it shows it pretty instantaneously, if not within at least 20 to 30 minutes. And it's really helpful to use as well for anybody wanting to see, if a student is in a pause status, if it's reported or submitted. So, but I'll show that a little later as well. So this one's a fairly common one as well in regards to remote test sessions, which we'll get into now. So inactive CAST high school science, it might say ELA or math. When it shows that below where it says test requires remote proctor, that means that the student hasn't been granted that video permissions in TOMS, whether it be through the upload or manually. So you just want to make sure to grant that remote test session, or if they choose not to test remotely, they would have to be tested in person. So you just want to make sure that's done at least a minimum of 24 hours again before you try to launch a remote session, or else this message will appear if it's still no for the student. So this is the section in regards to many common issues during remote sessions itself. You guys have probably come across this very often, even last year's administration as well, for the remote sessions. So the SAD cloud icon, this is a very popular one with LEAs across the region and what they're experiencing. So when this occurs, basically what's happening is there's a malfunctioning webcam, which is usually due to the connection issues or a slowdown on the student's network. The solution to that is just make sure the student is pausing their test. And I believe the chat feature will still be available to the TA, so they can actually use that chat feature and just ask them to restart their device and log back into that secure browser and that test session they have open currently. So that's a very popular one that comes across very often as far as the SAD cloud icon. Next, this one is the triangle with exclamation point and red circle. So this is happening because the test administrator or test examiner device and interface and the student interface, that communication widget, it's again due to a connection issue. So making sure prior to the testing, making sure the bandwidth is able to handle the students that are remote testing, checking internet connectivity is crucial so that we can avoid our best with this triangle with exclamation point and red circle. But basically the solution for that is having this TA stop the test session, and then basically you're going to alert either the site coordinator or the LEA level coordinator just to inform them that this is occurring, and then you'd want to check up with the IT department just to make sure that, again, those connection errors or issues are addressed before moving forward. Then lastly, we just have some resources here. I went ahead and included both the Summative Online Test Administration Manual for LPAC, and then now that a lot of the CAASPP windows are opening up, the Online Test Administration Manual directly. So again, the first thing we want to do is make sure that the examiners and administrators are contacting either the site level coordinators as their first resource, and then from there, please make sure that the LEA level coordinators are aware of this as well. We just want to keep them in the loop of anything that's happening within their school sites as well. And any technical assistance directly. So our protocol usually is we're speaking with the LEA level coordinators directly, whether that be via email, chat, or phone. If there's anything that is happening in the middle of a live test session with students, they can actually call the 800 number listed there directly for assistance. If they need to speak to the success agent, they'll be transferred to us directly. And that's it. Any questions?
Thank you,
Sorry,
Marcus.
I got a little one here. My apologies.
It's a
Thank
good
you,
problem
Marcus.
to have.
And
Yeah.
Marcus, remember I have something to share.
Sure.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wendy Missick. I work with Marcus on the outreach team. And I will say that you guys as a region are amazing in how you put together all your information and share it out with you all as a group. Great job. Additionally, Marcus really does work very hard to do his absolute best for you all when you're calling, chatting, or emailing. But please be patient because he is addressing a lot of different LEAs and does a really good job to make sure he's as thorough as possible to assist each and every one. So something new and exciting. And I would like to share my screen. And funny is, I am usually so involved with Teams instead of Zoom that then I'm like, now how do I do this? So I need to go back one of these days, and there we go. I share my screen. So if that's okay, Evan, Stephen, I'm going to share my screen.
Yes, please, Wendy.
All right. Let's see. Share. Right. I'm going to go screen 2. Now, again, I'm not great at this. I think if I click just a screen, will it allow me to switch my tabs?
If you're choosing your browser as what you want to share, yeah, you'll be able to, then we'll see what you have
Okay,
open on it,
let's
whichever
see.
tab you
Let's see
select.
if I do this right then.
There we go. Perfect.
We can see it.
No, let's see. Which screen is it sharing here?
We're seeing the CAASPP homepage currently.
Okay, you're seeing it over here, though, I think. Okay, so what is coming up is a way for you all to search live within the CAASPP or LPAC systems. And this is going to get changed. Let's see, move this out of the way here. Again, I'm not used to doing, how do I get rid of the little bar? Can you guys see the bar?
We don't see it, but you can drag it to get out of your own way.
Oh, okay, you don't see it. All right, good. Again, I need more practice on Zoom. Okay, so within the CAASPP or LPAC, when you go to this section where you can say help for LEA CAASPP coordinators, it is going to be getting updated today. Okay, could be any time. Where down here by email where it says success agent, that is going to change, and it will either be say something along the lines of answers and success agent. Oh, they gave me a super quick, like while this meeting was going on, because of changes that are happening. And what's going to happen is you're going to be able to go on to, again, caaspp.org or lpac.org. And when you go here and you click on this area, it's going to take you to a page for getting answers. So you see that screen, did it change?
It did not change screens.
It did not change. Let me, okay, does it change here?
Yeah, that changed it.
That's the one. Okay, so that's the screen we're on. Perfect. All right, so for any time that you are, let's clear that out here. When you are hoping to find something and you're going, okay, I just can't find it. Where is it? You're going to be able to go in here and get answers. And in the search bar, you're going to be able to type. So let's just say, for example, we're going to put in the word cast. Okay, so you want to know something about the science assessment. Right now, that one word brought up 17 possible things that you could use to find some answers. Now, you can scroll through these because it's taking you through what's in the website. You can click on all the different links. You go, oh, that's what I was looking for. Where was that? Okay. You can go down here. How do I know which students in my school have completed it? Okay. So at this point, we have certain Q&A things set up within the search. It will continue to be added and developed into even more search things. So you may not always get the a possible solution here. But let's just go, okay, we have 17. So cast, how about cast assignment? Oh, that took me down to one result. And who needs to take it? Well, this is given some links as to where it might take you to say, oh, that's exactly what I was trying to figure out. And this can be a super quick tool to be able to look over the whole website, easier than it used to be for up here in the search bar. This is really designed, and they're developing it to take very specific words and search. So when you did cast, it brought up things with that. With cast and assignment, it will bring up things that have both those words, okay? And up at the top here, you will see it gives a description of how to look. So for multiple words, you know, score report, it includes both. You can do a plus sign so that it will be either of those words. You can do it as I did also. It doesn't have to have the parentheses around it. So let's say, let's switch this up. Okay, but I need to know about icons. And Marcus was just showing you some things with icons. All right, so there's one result at this time. Again, we will be adding more and more things that will come up in the search. So right now, icons, and you're going to go, oh, okay, wait, here's a thing. Oh, it opens up this document, and looky here, here are some of those things with regards to all those icons, and you can quickly find, oh, okay, he was talking about the sad face and what, these things. And here's this PDF. All right. So that's a quick one. What else can we try here? How about test? Let's do test settings. Okay, at this time we have 5 results for adding test settings typed in that manner. Okay, how long does it take to show in the system? Test setting deadlines, etc. So what's exciting about this is that this is the beginning, and there are already a few hundred things listed that can be searched. And we've started out with what was the most common and what was in the FAQs. So instead of going to the FAQs and then trying to search through them and find the right one, all you have to do is go into the login tool right here for getting answers, boom, and it's going to bring them all up for you. And then you can narrow it down based on whether you're putting parentheses around something, changing the word, adding more words, etc. So we're pretty excited about this because we have no doubt that this is going to help to locate information, because there is so much information. As you guys have done your presentations today, it's like you see there's constantly things changing. There's new information, there's updates. Okay, let's see, the performance task now has a test window of 15 days, before it's, no longer available and times out. That's different than before. So things are always changing, but we're trying to also change so that we can better provide customer service to all of you and help you get those answers as quickly and as possibly necessary, so that there's not delays. And so this is pretty exciting. So you have questions about users, type in users, type in test security affidavits. So lots of information here. Okay, now here's one more thing that's going to happen. You're going to search something and you're not going to find it. There is going to be a link, and that link, it's not up yet. That link is going to take you to this form, and on this form you can put in, it says, please let us know any additional questions you do not find on the Get Answers page. Okay, so click next. You put in what your role is. Okay, I'm the LEA coordinator. All right, great. Next. What question were you looking for that you did not find the answer to, so that we can then be reviewing these and be working on getting this information uploaded, linked, etc. And then submit it. It'll come into the team, and there will be people that will be periodically going through and trying to add this information. So we really hope that you will use this, because it really is quick. It's the wave of the future. So
Wendy, thank you. Quick question, and I know one of our members already found the link, but you're saying that the link will be live later today under that Help for LEA CASP Coordinators menu there. Do you expect that?
Yes. So it
Okay.
should. They're going to update this, and when you go into the Success Agent, it takes you to this Get Answers. Okay, and it'll take you to this. And then that's where you're going to be able to type in what you're searching for.
Great.
And they are working on that being available today.
Awesome.
So I don't know how soon, but they are saying today.
Well, I'm really happy that you were able to join and share with us right now. It's good timing for our DAAN members, and thank you.
Yeah, it is. And hopefully right before, as things are going on and you're getting ready to really do those CAASPP assessments and the science, the CAST assessments, the CAAs, if you are having questions, check this out and put those questions in there that you aren't finding answers to, so that we can get those things linked up, because we're trying to determine also what are the most common questions that we need to get linked in. And so working on trying to get the things that people really need answers to, Now there's always going to be those odd questions or those things that aren't working quite right, that are either our CalTAC 800 number or our Success Agents are going to be there for you to assist you. But this is just another tool, and we hope that it really is a successful one for each of you.
Wendy, This is the beta version of the URL. Is that correct? The QC will probably drop out as it gets posted live.
Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah, you can't take that. You can mess with this right now. This is not the live version.
Okay.
I'm just demoing for you. This is not where you're going to be able to go. That's why I say when it will end up linked here, and it will be on there for you for as a lookup tool. Yeah, this was really our internal searching and stuff.
No, that is available
You guys are
publicly.
good. You're
It got
good. I
posted in
see
our
this.
chat. Okay.
We'll look
Yeah.
for we'll update it in our follow-up. But thank you both, Wendy, and especially Marcus. We always appreciate. We know how hard you work, and I think all our coordinators also really appreciate all the hard work you're putting in for them as well. That's it for today. We're gone over by a bit, but thanks for those of you who are able to stick with us. And we will get out a follow-up with any questions that were unresolved, and just to follow up, kind of getting all the questions that were asked, getting them consolidated into one response. Before we go, actually, Mr. Jimenez from Pali, I think, is asking, Marcus, can you please show us quickly the link that you mentioned where we can see the student completion report?
Sure, I'd be happy to do so. Let me go ahead and pull that up for you. So this is a bit different. It's not again, the report section that you'll be seeing in Tom's. Let me just pull up real quick my Tom's here. So under links in Tom's, sorry, let me log in again. While I'm doing this, did anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask, or anything that they may have thought during the last couple moments of the presentation or anything like that?
We did get a question asking for your PowerPoint, and you'll share it with us so we can upload it to Canvas.
Yeah, I'll definitely send that to you or Stephen directly, so you have that information.
Thank you.
Sure, of course.
I have a question. This is
Sure.
Linda Rosales from El Monte Union. We have students coming up in our completion report that have checked out, moved out of state, and so on. Some of these kids haven't been picked up by another LEA, which is alarming on another sense. But will those students be held against that particular school's count? Should they not be enrolled at another LEA, and some of these students that have actually moved out of state?
That's a great question. So as far as it becomes a point of participation or accountability, I'm not sure if Evan, if you wanted to address this, but anything as far as participation or accountability for LEA, we don't handle those questions directly. It's usually referred to the academic accountability unit.
Okay.
Yeah, Linda, I think if they're going to be cleaned out, those are probably just some remnants, but ultimately everything gets kind of scrubbed clean through CalPads, and they look at all the overlapping enrollment to kind of clarify district of residence, things like that. And so if you have any students who are just there now, it's probably just residual, and they will get those cleaned out before it gets sent for reporting.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, usually that happens and when they're usually cleaned out. But again, I understand the LEAs. I've been getting that email and that call and that chat over and over again for the past couple of weeks about the completion report. So I definitely understand them still appearing is kind of frustrating. So I definitely understand that.
Thank
So
you.
the link I was referring to, let me just share the window here. Let me pull that up here. So the window I was referring to is here. So under the link section in Tom's, so I'm currently logged into Tom's. If you go here to the third one down, should say completion status. If you click on that, it's going to access the Cambium system. Now, you guys, I'm not sure if some of you have logged in as far as that, and this looks all familiar. It should. I'll log in here myself. And then you've probably seen these two screens before. This next one's coming up here. So on the completion status report side, there's going to be a drop-down section. Sorry, it takes a moment to load. There's going to be two of them. So the two I use mostly on a daily basis is plan and manage testing, but also search by SSID. So when you're searching by SSID, what's going to happen is, let's just go to that one first. You can put in, I believe, any SSID up to 20 as long as they're separated by commas. And what will happen is when you input the SSID to this box here and then click on generate report, it's going to show a table and a list of the students, and it'll show as a couple different things. If the test doesn't appear for them, that indicates that the TA or the test examiner has not actually started or launched that session. So say, for example, you're looking for a student for the ELA performance task. If you input the SSID of the student there and the ELA performance task, the summative one, doesn't appear, that indicates that the student hasn't yet started that test. If you input that and the student has either begun the test or is currently in progress with that test, in the table itself below, it'll actually show either paused or, yeah, so it's going to show paused most likely, or it's going to actually show the number of question, like for example, question 8 of 12 that they're on. It's not going to show live time progress, of course, of those, but it's going to show as they progress through the test. Like if you were to refresh the page, it'll show like the number of questions being answered if they were actually in the middle of the test go up. So it'd be 8:12, and then you refresh the page again, it might say 9:12 or 10:12, and that basically is an indication that they're going through the test at this time. But again, it's not going to show actual live time of the student going through the test. It'll just show those updated questions that they've answered so far, and it'll be updated here.
Mark,
when it's
Mark,
yeah, go
Marcus,
ahead.
can I clarify this with you?
Yeah.
So the Cambium system is more of a real-time, almost real-time test completion status, whereas the TOMS version of test completion data is going to be delayed. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the way it works for the completion reports within TOMS, there's a bit of a delay because it's pulling different parts of information, but the completion status under the Cambium system is a lot more real time than you're going to see than the reports in TOMS. So it's going to give a more up-to-date completion of the test and those students as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I just find it really helpful to use that a little bit more than the reports in TOMS, because again, the reports in TOMS are a bit delayed because it's pulling different types of information and transporting that. Going back to that, let me just pull up the search feature. So again, if anybody has an SSID they'd like to use, I can actually show what the table looks like if you wanted to drop that in the chat or anything like that. Even if it's just a sample SSID, I can definitely double check and we can see what the students completed. So it'll actually show all tests for a student, both on whether it's an interim, smarter balanced, or even LPAC. So it'll show just everything listed there when you check that student. Don't see anything in the chat yet, so I'll go ahead and continue for right now. Now going back to this drop-down section here, as you can see, the test, the plan and manage test section, that's also one I want to go over as well. So this here will actually allow you to see a couple different things using some different search filters. So as you can see, there are 3 sections within this plan and manage testing that is also going to show you. You can also display it as a table as well, but it'll actually allow you to download the as an Excel spreadsheet as well. So as you can see here, you have a couple different search filters. You have the test instrument, so it allows you to get specific for which actual test you're looking for. On my end, it's going to show all of these tests because we have access to both LPAC and CAASPP. But I believe based on the role you log in as, you're going to have access for LPAC, and then you're going to have access for CAASPP based on your role you've logged in as. But for me, it's going to show everything here listed. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I did put a SSID so you can show us what it would look like.
Sure.
What's the broadest get specific settings that we can possibly use so we can get everybody?
Sure. Yeah, of course. So those, depending on who and what you're trying to look for is, so you have a couple different options as far as these radio buttons. So you have the first one, which is used most commonly. You have a couple different drop-down options as far as if you're looking for students who have completed any opportunity for summative. Again, that's only going to be the one opportunity. But if the test instrument is selected as either an ICA or an IAB, this any is going to turn into 1, 2, and 3, because technically there are up to 3 attempts for an ICA and there's going to be unlimited attempts for an IAB. So this will change according to the test instrument and what you select there. So for these drop downs, you have or have not, and then completed or started. So based on what you select from these drop downs, it's going to show you whether student has or has not, or completed or started. And then again, based on what test you're selecting, it's going to show the opportunities available. Since it's under initial LPAC at this time, they only have one opportunity to complete that. If I switch to IABs, you'll see that update and change again as well. You see how it has all of those listed there as multiple attempts for the IABs. And again, so forth with ICAs, it'll show up to 3 attempts there. Now, this second radio button here allows you to actually see students who, and again, since it's on ICAs, it's going to have 3 attempts there. So it's going to show any of those attempts, and then also the status of that. Approved, completed. Oh, you know what? These are for stairs. I'm sorry. So you'll be able to look up by stairs as well with this particular button. So, and have the status of approved, completed, denied. Those are denied, expired. That is a test status as well. Invalidated, pause. So these are, sorry, so these are all actually all statuses that you'd see for these. But a lot of these have to do with stairs specifically, because I'm looking at invalidated, which is usually associated with stairs cases. So it's going to show statuses of those students based on that as well. And then you have any as well. Sorry, it's just uploading. Now the third one, you'll be able to look up if you're looking specifically for students by their SSIDs. So you'll be able to enter SSIDs as well, listed here, or name. In any case, I usually prefer using SSIDs, as there could be students that have multiple same first and last names, but again, they'll be direct to your LEA. So either by name or SSID of those students. The fourth one here, students who have a current opportunity that will expire in or between, and then you can actually see when the test is open. For example, a student who just opened the ELA performance task, you should be able to see, is it going to expire in those 15 calendar days, or is it less than that? So you can use that radio button here. And then the last one, you can get even more specific with using a session ID or the actual name of that TA who oversaw that session. And then you can choose between these 2 calendars as well for the specific dates. And then just going back briefly up here, you can also select the exact test as well, just if you wanted to get more specific as far as the test itself that you're looking for. Any questions on anything? Well, I'm going to just check the chat as well here. Good point, Eric. Yeah, so the domains will appear in separate tests. That's correct. And you're correct. Summative LPAC will have 5 entries listed there if you look at search by SSID. Yeah, Ruth, the teacher field, I believe that was disabled. I know, I can definitely double check to see if it was, but I believe that feature had been disabled as well from a past administration year. I'm not sure if it's back up and running though, but I can definitely double check for you, Ruth, no problem. Do you have any other questions for me?
I think that's about, we're about a half hour over, so I think
Yeah.
need to wrap it up here. I really appreciate you taking the time. Maybe
Sure.
for future meetings, we may just add an extra session because it's so valuable to have you in person to go through these live demos. That's really helpful. So seeing no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap the meeting up, stop recording, and we will send out updates. As I noted, I know there were some problems with the links in the earlier presentation. I know what happened. We had some last minute shuffling of slides. So we'll get an update sent out with a recording of today just as soon as we can. And thank you for joining us. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
Thanks, Marcus.